It's not over until it's over, and we still have a hell of a lot more ground to cover. And I am doing everything. With that, we get to the DC TV shows, which are a counterpart to the Marvel shows that aren't the Disney Plus shows. So the Netflix shows, plus the ones from Hulu, Freeform, and ABC. Due to the volume of characters, I will just be doing the main characters, some supporting characters, and main villains. Now, with all of this, I'm going to try and be looser with some of these adaptations, because I realize that me being too close to having a proper counterpart to certain characters, I lose some story potential that would be better by just making it fit with the larger media counterpart that I chose. So I am going to try and do that for the shows so that they make more sense. First, we have the first ever show attributed to the cinematic universe, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. with Soldiers of Argus, 2013 to 2020. Argus does have a few similarities with S.H.I.E.L.D., not a ton, but enough that you could make this work and build a show around it, obviously. However, I'm gonna be making it a bit more militaristic than what Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was. This one, despite being the first show, is actually kind of the toughest. Mainly because, unlike most of the shows that I'm gonna be doing, there isn't really a villain-by-villain basis for each season, as well as being the longest running out of all of these shows. There's sometimes an entire species that's the villain, not just one guy, as well as having episodic adventures. So I decided to just cast the bare essentials and possibly some villains that Argus has come across and put them here. So the main cast of characters would be Amanda Waller, played by Yvette Nicole Brown, Dale Gunn, played by Common, Alba Garcia, who would eventually become Black Orchid, played by Natalia Cordova Buckley, Dr. John Peril, played by Clark Gregg, Nomo Balewa, who would eventually become Dr. Mist, played by J. August Richards, and then finally Sasha Bordeaux, who would be played by Chloe Bennett. Then for the villains, they could either be a season-long villain or have a multiple season arc with the main characters, or just pop up a few times, depending. Andres Cajulo, played by Henry Simmons, Nick Necro, played by Ian Day K-Stecker, Dr. Mist, much like in the comics, he would betray the team and he'd still be played by J. August Richards, Grey Laura, played by Ruth Negga, and Basilisk. Blackbriar Thorn, played by Adrian Pasdar, Felix Faust, played by John Hanna, and then Black Boris, played by Kyle MacLachlan in a human form, but he would be CGI for the most part. And then there would be smaller day-by-day villains, but that would be too much to cast, as well as species and other groups, so I'm leaving it here. Next, we have the counterpart for Agent Carter, which is Agent Pennyworth from 2015 to 2016. Being a prequel to the events of the modern day adventures, I felt a show based on Pennyworth would make the most sense, since just like Carter, he was a spy or some type of government agent, depending on the continuity. So I felt that this character made the most sense in that respect, especially when we got something similar years later, which we will of course eventually get to. Obviously, the main character would be Alfred Pennyworth, and he would be played by James Darcy. Now, in this case, in terms of another character important to Alfred's past would be Mademoiselle Marie, since she would have his child eventually. She would be played by Paula Patton. Then, Thomas Wayne would be played by Dominic Cooper, Martha Kane would be played by Bridget Reagan, and then Kathy Webb would be played by Lindsay Fonseca. Not a ton of characters attributed to Alfred's past, and the fact that the main cast of the actual show wasn't too big either, so that's all I got. And there wasn't really a main villain to cast, just a ton of smaller ones, so I decided to abscond casting villains, since it could just be various missions that Alfred does while he works for whatever organization he works for. Could be the SAS, could be a predecessor to Argus, I don't know, but whatever fits the most in terms of the continuity. Next is the counterpart for Daredevil, which is a bit looser with Dr. Midnight from 2015 to 2018. Both are street-level heroes that, due to an accident, they become blind, but through various means become even stronger than they were before, and doesn't let their supposed weakness impede them. Again, being as loose as I can with this, and there was enough similarities to make it work. So, Dr. Midnight would be played by Charlie Cox because he's fantastic. Instead of being a very good lawyer, he'll be a very good doctor. For supporting characters, I would have Myra Mason for the Karen Page counterpart, played by Deborah Ann Wool. Then for another supporting character that kinda mimicked Foggy Nelson, I thought Terry Sloan worked the best, and despite not being a doctor in the comics, I would make him one. Kinda merging with the second incarnation of Mr. Terrific ever so slightly, since Michael Holt has like 14 PhDs or whatever. And plus, Terry Sloan can do like a fucking million things anyway, so might as well just make him a doctor. He would be played by Eldon Henson. For Ben Urich, I picked a rather unknown character named George Taylor from the comics, as he fit into the Golden Age aesthetic that I was aiming for with this series. He was essentially the Perry White before Perry White. He would be played by Vondi Curtis Hall. Finally, for the Claire Temple counterpart, I decided on Leslie Tompkins, as I felt that fit the best, and she would be played by Joanne Whaley. Then for the main villain of Season 1, I thought one that matched the intellect of Kingpin but doing his own thing would be Ultra Humanite. I thought he was a pretty damn good villain and made sense. He would be voiced by D. Bradley Baker. Then for Season 2, I'm going to be stretching it a bit with villains that don't necessarily make sense for Dr. Midnight, but they will make sense in a comparison sense. Which I said I wasn't going to do, but I felt that they were kinda too perfect. For the Hand, a great counterpart would be the League of Assassins, and then you would have Elodie Yung play Talia al Ghul. Perfect. Then for the Punisher, obviously the counterpart would be Vigilante, and he would eventually get his own spinoff. Then for Season 3, Ultra Humanite would return, and then for the Bullseye character, instead of doing a literal counterpart like Deadshot, I decided on someone that fit the Golden Age vibe more, since Ultra Humanite is the villain again. I ultimately decided on Sportsmaster, and he would be played by Wilson Bethel. Now here is a really obscure character for the Jessica Jones counterpart. Cameron Chase from 2015 to 2019. Again, a bit looser, as Chase is more so known as a government agent for the DEO rather than a private eye like Jones. However, very early in her career, she was a private eye, so we can possibly start there. Cameron Chase would be played by Rachel Taylor, because I think she would fit the character more than Kristen Ritter. For supporting characters, I decided to keep Malcolm, played by Ika Darville, because he was an original character, so might as well use him here. Makes sense, right? Then for the Trish Walker counterpart, adding back in that Golden Age theme coming from Daredevil, I think Yolanda Montez would be a good fit. While yes, Yolanda Montez isn't technically a Golden Age character, her predecessor is, and he's a fan favorite, so might as well use her, because it would mean that Wildcat is canon at some point, so fuck it, he's awesome, so it works, shut up. She would be played by Gina Rodriguez. Then for the Jerry Hogarth counterpart, I thought somebody really cool to add simply because I like the character would be Augustus Freeman. I just think he's great, and Icon needs more love. He would be played by Chiwetel Ejiofor. Then for the villains, I think the closest Kilgrave counterpart would be Maxwell Lord. Even though Lord wouldn't be so invested in something as personal as one woman, there could be a greater plot that could involve the DEO to tease the possible team up between them and Chase in the future. He would be played by David Tennant, because David Tennant is fucking awesome. Then for the Season 2 villain of Carl Malice, I thought the best counterpart would be Paul Westfield, who is the director of Cadmus in the comics. Considering Malice gave people superpowers, Westfield kind of fits into that concept of a leader of an organization that experiments on people. He would be played by Callum Keith Rennie. Then for the Season 3 villains, Montez becomes a villainous version of Wildcat, and then for the other main villain with Gregory Salinger, a good counterpart would be a darker version of Christopher Smith, aka Peacemaker, because Fool Killer and Peacemaker are pretty similar in quite a few ways. He would be played by Jeremy Bobb. This one is a bit more of an in-joke, but I still think it works in terms of the Luke Cage counterpart, Black Lightning from 2016 to 2018. They aren't really that similar outside of being black guys with powers who used to wear goofy as fuck costumes. But since these shows in our universe came out at around the same time, there was the ongoing joke that the show Black Lightning was just a lesser version of Luke Cage, as both had similar themes with each of their characters, so I decided to lean into that. In addition, that both, while not the first, were a major step in terms of black characters as heroes, as well as Tony Isabella writing for the Cage character before creating Black Lightning. I ultimately decided on Mahershala Ali as Black Lightning. While I do think that Ali is better at playing villains and Coulter would be a great Black Lightning, I think Coulter would fit better elsewhere, and Ali is extremely talented anyway. Then for supporting characters, I would have Bill Henderson, played by Ron Cephas Jones, Lynn Stewart, played by Simone Missick, Peter Gamby, played by Bob Bob Gunton, Anissa Pierce, played by Halle Bailey, and Jen Pierce, played by Storm Reed. The main villain of Season 1 would have to be Tobias Whale, because that's his arch nemesis, and obviously Vincent D'Onofrio would be too perfect for that role, since Whale is a Kingpin type character anyway. Then for the Diamondback character, I decided on Painkiller, because while being his own character, still kind of works as a henchman of the main villain. He would be played by Jaden Kane. Then for Season 2, with both Black Mariah and Bushmaster as villains, I decided to simply reuse Whale, because that just makes sense, rather than killing the way more interesting villain halfway through Season 1 and being stuck with a shittier villain. Yeah, I said it. Anyway, the other villain, Bushmaster, has a couple different ways he can go. There's Copperhead, but they're honestly more of a Batman villain rather than anything, so I decided on a more general villain with Cobra. Since Bushmaster in Luke Cage is the leader of a small sect of criminals, I thought it would make sense to combine both iterations of Bushmaster, the master criminal and then the guy with snake powers, into one character and make him Cobra, since it covers both. Although it's a cult, not just a small sect of criminals. He would be played by Mustafa Shakir. Then another loose one with the Iron Fist counterpart, Richard Dragon, from 2017 to 2018. Both are martial artists who happen upon this way of life through intriguing circumstances. Plus, he's one of the few martial artists who are white, and no matter what people say, that matters to Danny Rand's character. So I felt that mattered here, so Richard Dragon it is. I wanted someone who was a bit older who could actually fight, so I decided on Scott Adkins for Richard Dragon. Yeah, he can't act to save his life, but Finn Jones couldn't fight to save his life, so I feel like you have to have one way or the other. Then for supporting characters, I would have Ben Walker, aka Bronze Tiger, and he would be played by Mike Coulter, as I felt he was too perfect for that character. Carolyn Wusan, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, and if I'm not, I dearly apologize. She would be a friend of Richard Dragon, and she would be played by Jessica Henwick. I also wanted to add a Ward Meacham counterpart, since he becomes more of an ally in Season 2, and I think a good choice as a good businessman character would be Oliver Queen. Mainly because I think Finn Jones would fit better into that role, and he's just a great character that needs more love, in terms of the actual character rather than being Batman light. Then finally, for Season 2, I saw that Misty Knight had a main role. I never got a chance to watch Season 2. I probably will eventually. And while I didn't plan to have a counterpart to her character, since she was more of a Luke Cage character, as well as her counterpart being Bill Henderson in Black Lightning, I thought of a character to add who would be perfect. Renee Montoya, mainly because Dragon trained her Question predecessor, Vic Sage, so there was some sort of connection there, as well as being a detective, of course. She would be played by Ana de Armas. The villains this time around would be Celia Konstantakis, in addition to the League of Assassins for Season 1. Again, I apologize if I butchered the name. I just wanted to look up characters that were tight-knit with the League, and she came up, and since she was an evil CEO like Harold Meacham, I thought she worked. She would be played by Jean Smart. Then for Season 2, with the villain being a family member, I decided on her son, Nicholas, also known as Tracker. Lady Shiva would also be a villain, combining elements of Davos and Joy Meacham, both being allies turned enemies, with one being skilled in martial arts. They would be played by Tom Pelphrey and Kelly Hu, respectively. Then we have all of them joining forces for the Defenders counterpart with the Outsiders. This one is pretty easy. Since the Netflix Defenders didn't really match up with the OG Defenders, I thought I might as well just take any small team and use them here. I decided on the Outsiders because it's not a hugely well-known team that has smaller, lesser-known heroes, as well as the fact that Black Lightning is a character on both, so that actually works here. And the Defenders are also described as Outsiders on the Wikipedia page, so that probably also helped my decision. Pretty much everyone reprises their roles with their respective supporting characters. Dr. Midnight, Cameron Chase, Black Lightning, and Richard Dragon would be the main Outsiders, along with Malcolm DeCasse, Terry Sloan, Carolyn Woosen, Bill Henderson, Yolanda Montez, Myra Mason, Talia al Ghul, Leslie Tompkins, Renee Montoya, and Augustus Freeman. I am also going to add a counterpart for Bakuto here. The reason I didn't do it for Richard Dragon is because I think in the course of this version of the show, he wouldn't have needed a bigger role. While here, being a part of the main villains, I thought to add a counterpart here, and I decided on David Kane. Then for the main villain, instead of random white woman, I'm going to use Ra's al Ghul because duh. He would be played by Alexander Siddig, since God Gotham would be a Marvel show in this world, might as well use him here, right? Alright, so this is a bit of a weirder one, but since Inhumans has absolutely no counterpart I can possibly think of, I decided to go with the Forever People in 2017. I had a different idea initially, but a friend of mine who knows better than I do suggested the Forever People, and I thought that probably would have been better. Plus, having them fused in the Amalgam universe also helped. Probably where he got it from. So let's go. The heroes that would make up the Forever People are Big Bear, played by Nathan Jones, Beautiful Dreamer, played by Serinda Swan, Mark Moonrider, played by Ken Lung, Seraphan, played by Michael Bowie, Viking, played by, and I'm going to butcher this name, so I severely apologize, M.A. Ikwakor, and Infinity Man, played by Anson Mount. I would make the main villain one of the henchmen of Darkseid, so you don't have such a big villain as the main villain of this smaller TV show, since he is a character that would be the big bad of the first 3 phases anyway. So the main villain I decided on would be Metron, played by Henry Ian Cusick, because he's an interesting character that would make for a cool villain, but Darkseid would make a cameo, because of course he would. Now back to the more obvious counterparts with the Punisher. We get Vigilante from 2017 to 2018. I mean, this was obvious for 2 reasons. 1, I already mentioned it with the Dr. Midnight counterpart, and 2, it's essentially the same character. Guy's family, specifically a wife, a son, and a daughter, gets murdered by the mob, and he goes crazy. Although for Vigilante, it took a little bit longer to get there in terms of actually murdering people. Bernthal would be Vigilante, as I mentioned. The main villain of Season 1 would be Anthony Scarapelli, who killed his family because he is his most popular villain, and he would be played by Ben Barnes. For the supporting character that season, it would be J.J. Davis, who is very similar to Micro, and he would be played by Eben Moss Bachrock. Then for the Season 2 villain, it would be a character named Henry Cannon, who is simply a hitman like John Pilgrim was, but doesn't have any affiliation with religion like Pilgrim does. He would still be played by Josh Stewart. Finally, for the Amy Bendix character, the closest one I could find to that character is Teresa Gomez, and she would be played by Floriana Lima. Here, in this version of the show, she would, I guess, kind of be a love interest for Vigilante, but it would eventually not become anything for obvious reasons. So there would be some differences there, but whatever. That's all I have. Moving on. This one is really reaching because DC doesn't really have a counterpart for this, so it's going to be super loose with the Runaways counterpart, and I decided on Young Justice from 2017 to 2019. So, Runaways is so ultra specific that DC definitely doesn't have a counterpart. So I ultimately decided on another team with young heroes that can fit into that vein. I thought Teen Titans was a bit too popular, as well as my next pick relating too close to that, so Young Justice it is. Alright, so the team consists of Robin, played by Renzi Feliz. I mean, we've gotten a black Tim Drake at this point, so whatever, it works. Superboy, played by Greg Sulkin. Impulse, played by Jimmy Bennett. Wonder Girl, the Cassie Sandsmark version, played by Virginia Gardner. Secret, played by Ariella Bearer. Arrowette, played by Lyrica Okano. And Red Tornado, played by Kip Pardue. I decided to go for villains that they fought before, rather than specific counterparts. With this, I picked Clarion the Witch Boy, played by Freddie Highmore for Season 1. Harm, played by Julian McMahon for Season 2, and then Nina Dowd, played by Elizabeth Hurley for Season 3. But there isn't really a ton of supporting characters here, so we'll move on. Another difficult counterpart because there is no proper DC version with Cloak and Dagger, so I decided on Raven and Starfire from 2018 to 2019. This was the closest I could think of for these characters. There's only so many counterparts, you know? And with their power set and personalities kind of being similar to the characters here, I decided on these two. Raven and Starfire would be played by Peyton List and Olivia Holt respectively. I thought Holt already fit that character, and Peyton List is good at playing darker outcast characters, so I thought she fit for Raven. Then for Rachel's mother, Angela, I thought Andrea Roth fit that type of character, and ironic that they had the same last name too. Then for a family member of Starfire, the only one that came to mind was Blackfire, and she could be a villain for Season 1 and then become an ally for Season 2, since she kind of rides that line between good and evil. She would be played by Lily Simmons. Then for Raven's other parent, might as well have Trigon here, in a smaller role. I would probably probably have him make a cameo every once in a while in season 1 and then become the big bad for season 2. He would be played by Miles Musendin. Then for Bridget O'Reilly, or eventually Mayhem, I thought the character of Rosenthorn was perfect, since this version of Mayhem acts as a personality of O'Reilly that is a ruthless vigilante, with O'Reilly being a decent cop. I thought that fit with Rosenthorn's character. She would still be played by Emma Lahana, but that's it. As I said, the villain of season 1 would be Blackfire, and then season 2 it's Trigon, but maybe at reduced power, so it can actually work here. Finally, for the last DC show that I will be covering here, which is Hellstrom's counterpart, we have Etrigan in 2020. Yeah, remember this show? This shit was on the way out after Marvel Television shut down due to reasons. But they had this, so might as well actually show it. Warner Brothers, take fucking notes. Anyway, Hellstrom is a smaller demonic character, and I thought something that would fit would be Etrigan the Demon. He's a cool character that kind of fits into this mold, so I went with him. Jason Blood would be played by Tom Austin, and obviously CGI would be Etrigan himself. Then for his sister's counterpart, I decided on Detective Kincaid. Not a sister, but someone who helped out Jason Blood at one time. She would be played by June Carroll, and since Lilith is an actual character outside of these companies, both of them have one, so just going to use her here as well, played by Elizabeth Marvel. Then for the Caretaker, the best character I could come up with was Madame Xanadu, as they have interacted a lot in the comics, and I like the character, so I decided to use her here. She would be played by Deborah Van Valkenburg. Then for another character to fit in here is Glinda Mark, who is a love interest for Jason Blood, and she would be played by Sydney Lemon. Then for the Gabriella Rossetti character, since she was gender bent from the original character, I decided to go back to the original character to compare the two, and I decided on Dr. Occult. Smaller character, but works. He would be played by Daniel Cudmore. Then finally, I also decided to add Belial as sort of the villain of the series because, evil father. There was an evil father in Hellstrom. Might as well use him. He would be played by Mitch Pileggi, as well as CGI. But that is about it for DC TV. Well, at least all of the shows that are not on, Disney Plus, or in this case, HBO Max. So, if you want to find out about that, gotta tune in next time for the rest of DC TV. See you later.